Okay, good evening. This is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network. This is the Truth Attack Hour, and yes, that's right, folks. We're back. We're back with the Truth Attack. So let's go ahead and get right into the show today because I want to try and get back to the article we were reading last week about the Donald Trump change in the law controlling the income tax, destroying the IRS and the DOJ's claims and arguments in court that it's a direct tax under the 16th Amendment, which is a complete and total fraud. So we've been going through that. I'm going to get back into that, but first, let's go through the first section here with current events. We are the Liberty Works Radio Network, and we do need the support of the members of the listening audience to keep the network operating and the broadcast coming. So if you enjoy the show, the topics, the information, and the discussions, we sure would appreciate it if you could find your way over to the LibertyWorksRadioNetwork.com website and get signed up as a subscribing member. Even if it's as little as $10, $20 a month, every subscription helps, and we do need your support to keep the network operating. And if you want to get fully informed on the maladministration of the federal income tax by the IRS, the DOJ, and the federal judges, you need to find your way over to the tax-freedom.com website and start reading, or find your way over to the Thomas Freed YouTube channel and start watching the videos, and or find your way over to irszoom.com and pick yourself up a copy of The Simple Truth About Income Tax. It's just $4. I got it posted at $5 right now. I'm going to take it back down to $4 until after the tax season. So by tomorrow morning, that'll be just $4 at irszoom.com. And if you want to get fully informed, you should get the American Tax Bible, an 800-page PDF encyclopedia, shall we say, on dealing with the IRS and the history of the tax and the laws controlling its enforcement and application, which the IRS is devoid of any knowledge or connection to in operational practice. The whole thing is a fraud. It's not a tax system. It's a system of peonage plantation operation, where the population has been reduced to the level of peons and serfs that exist only to service the debts of the master on the hill, Capitol Hill, whose master, of course, is the Federal Reserve Bank, the private corporation that finds itself the beneficiary of all the tax revenues for income tax collected, allegedly collected, as tax for the Treasury. But none of the money goes in the Treasury. It all goes to the private corporation because it's not tax. It's collateralizing the $35 trillion in debt. You've been enslaved. You've been turned into a nation of peons and serfs who exist only to service the $35 trillion in debt that their master owes to the world ruler, the Federal Reserve Bank. So, there you go. All available. All you have to do is be curious enough to read the $4 brochure, The Simple Truth About Income Tax, at irszoom.com. Okay, so Joe the Uniter. He has so divided this nation that we now have two diverging, parallel, alternate realities. One on Main Street, where capital is becoming scarce, costs are becoming oppressive, the quality of life is being destroyed, a depression approaches as Main Street is cut off from access to capital by the inverted yield curve, and the alternate reality over on Wall Street, where they're just booming. They've got so much cash on hand. $6 trillion is sitting on the sidelines waiting to invest in the stock market on every single drop it incurs. And the market keeps running away because that's where all the capital is. They created inflation on Wall Street. Too much money chasing too few goods, i.e. valuable stocks. And on Main Street, you don't have enough money available to the general population for them to maintain the quality of life they've been able to enjoy for 60 years. All of a sudden, costs are too oppressive, and the people are being destroyed and pushed into the poorhouse, while Wall Street and the bankers walk away with all the money, and the Federal Reserve Chairman refuses to reduce the short-term interest rate even just enough to disinvert the yield curve to motivate the banks to begin lending again on Main Street. And I think it's all going to come unglued when the commercial real estate numbers hit the banks that are holding the bag. It's all going to come unglued. So Joe the Uniter has divided the country and made us more divided than we ever have been. And he's weaponized all of the police and justice system organizations against not the criminals, not the cartels, not the drug smugglers, not the criminals, not the looters, not the arsonists, not the crazy people assaulting people, not the open drug markets, not the third world flea markets setting up on the sidewalks of every city in the country. No, those aren't what they're going after with law. They're going after Republicans, Catholics, parents, people who believe that we should make America great again instead of making America a slave again, which is what Joe Biden is doing, is turning America into the slave for the world. Finance Ukraine, finance this, finance that, pay for everything except for the American people. Just print it up and run it out. As goes the currency, so goes the fate of the nation. They are running it out. And if they aren't stopped, the currency will be destroyed, and so will the American people and our republic. Other news, well, Trump won a bond reduction, right? You had Letitia James and all the Democrats gleefully gloating over how they were going to go and seize Donald Trump's assets, and AOC telling everyone, oh, the risk is in not taking the assets right now, immediately. What's this idiot think the buildings are going to get up and walk away? The buildings are where the wealth is. They're not leaving. You can't force judgment before appeals have occurred. You can secure the assets, but you can't enforce a transfer of title. These people are idiots. They got no idea what's going on. And this is a state attorney general. Complete idiots. It's got nothing to do with law. It's all about political persecution and denying Donald Trump the use of his cash in the upcoming campaign. And of course, to try and discredit and libel him as much as possible. So before the trial, so that when the appeal reverses everything, that will be after the trial and it will be too late. The damage will be done. It's as obvious as the nose on your face. Democrats are all idiots, and they've literally turned into fanatical Nazis when it comes to dealing with Donald Trump. Donald Trump is the new, dare I say it, Jew, and MAGA is the new Jewish population that the Nazis are after. It's crazy. How do people not see these analogies? Black Lives Matter is the brown shirt operation of Adolf Hitler. And now you're getting the same effect with the pro-Palestinian Hamas terrorist support that the far left youth socialist supports, apparently not understanding the history of World War II and the Middle East across the last, 2,000 years? Good God. Do people not understand that the Arab states sided with Adolf Hitler and the Nazis in World War II, and there are consequences to picking the wrong side in a war that you lose? That's why Israel is where it is. Because the Arabs picked the wrong side in World War II. Okay, so April 15th, Peonage Day is coming. It's not tax day, it's Peonage Day, where all the peons and serfs are required to give up a large percentage of their annual produce and make a complete and full disclosure to the government of all of their activities, as all good little peons and slaves do. Need we say more? Okay, I guess everybody knows at this point that in Baltimore, the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapsed in the middle of the night when a container ship collided with one of the main structural supports for the bridge. And the video is just, you don't catch this stuff on video normally, but they got it. And the bridge the whole thing's gone in 2 seconds. It's just wild to watch it collapse. Obviously a terrible accident. A number of people were killed working on the bridge and possibly in cars. And that's just terrible, but it does appear to be an accident caused by a fire on board the ship that must have in some way interfered with the ability to steer the vessel. So that's what's going on. It was a U.S. crew that had taken over, a Baltimore crew that had taken over steerage of the boat, bringing it into the harbor, just like always occurs with big boats. It's always a local crew that guides the boat into the harbor. That way they don't have incidents like this that don't have some underlying machine failure as cause, as it appears to be in this case, which started the fire. But immediately, Pete Buttigieg, who has absolutely failed catastrophically to respond to other events that had happened before, like the East Palestine train wreck, he's immediately out over in Baltimore yelling and screaming about, well, not yelling and screaming, but making a big deal about a lot of noise about how Congress is going to have to pony up the dollars to rebuild the bridge. And everyone talking about rebuild. No, wait a minute. Baltimore has 2 tunnels that go underneath the river. The bridge obviously is a problem given that the port activities are getting larger, the ships are getting bigger. You don't need to rebuild that bridge. You should just clear out the debris, enlarge the port, make it capable of handling bigger container ships, route the cars through a tunnel, and instead of spending the $1 billion on a bridge, spend a third of that putting a new lane on the Baltimore Beltway. Route the trucks around the Beltway and the cars through the tunnels. A much better solution, in my opinion, than just rushing in and automatically putting back a 60-year-old bridge that appears to be more of a problem than a facility. So, there you go. Okay, over at NBC, no conservative voices allowed, not even one. They hired Ronna McDaniel after she left as chairman of the Republican National Committee, and it only took 2 days for the entire hosting staff at NBC and MSNBC to go completely bat crap crazy. Just mad as hell that their network had assigned one oppositional voice to appear on the show and give the conservative side of an issue, rather than just have one-sided agenda pressing like they've had for 8 years over there. And they fired her after 3 days. No conservative voices allowed. Boycott NBC. It's nothing but liberal socialist agenda. There's no news there. If you're watching the news, you're being indoctrinated, not educated. And Mexican President Obrador is saying that if the U.S. doesn't give Mexico and Central America and South American countries $20 billion a year, the immigration stream is just going to continue. And that sounds like extortion. And that pretty much means you need to put Donald Trump back in office because he understood how to deal with these countries, and Joe Biden is a moron. He just sits there and takes it. His solution is going to be to give him $20 billion. What an idiot. What an absolute idiot. Elected an idiot for president. And Corinne Jean-Pierre was invited to go on a morning talk show host, where the first question the radio host asked her, he said, gee, I'm getting this same question from so many of my viewers. I'm sorry, but I have to ask it. Does Joe Biden have dementia? And rather than answer the question, because the answer is yes, Joe Biden has dementia, Corinne Jean-Pierre got all upset and said, oh, that question is offensive. Yeah, but the radio listeners, America is asking it. Why won't you answer it? And then he asked her, well, how do you explain the high costs on everything to the American people? And she said, oh, Joe Biden's been working really hard to lower costs, and he's been successful for the last year. I'm sorry, you've doubled the cost of everything and brought it down 10%, not because of anything Biden did, but because the oil market stabilized around low demand in the future. So, no. Joe isn't successful. The costs are outrageous. And then she says, have an amazing, amazing day, and hangs up on the talk show host. That's what this administration thinks of America and the American people. They're hanging up on you. Sit down, shut up, and do what you're told. Okay, this is Thomas Fried on the Liberty Works Radio Network, and let's just get right back into it. Freedom comes from God, not government. God's true plan for mankind is freedom, derived from faith in God. You misplace your faith in any other entity, person, institution, philosophy, or thing, you will be betrayed by the entity in whom you've placed your faith instead of God. You will be betrayed and enslaved by that unfounded faith in man rather than God. And this, my friends, is the history of the government of mankind. Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. God's true plan for mankind is freedom derived from faith in God. Okay, so the court in New York has imposed another unconstitutional gag order on Donald Trump, this time in conjunction with the hush money trial, where Donald Trump is being put on trial for paying a prostitute, not to have sex, but to go away and keep quiet. I think he's probably the only man in America in 35, 40 years to be prosecuted for having not sex, but paying her to go away instead of paying her to have sex. So they are off on another, God knows what, just making it up, trying to slander him any way they can. And of course, now the Biden administration is trying to blame inflation on climate change. No, guys, climate change doesn't cause inflation. Stupid politicians do. And Joe Biden caused all of this inflation by raising the cost of gasoline and diesel on day one and your electric utility bill, which increased the cost at every single step and every single level of our product production and distribution system. At the factory, on the truck, at the store, at the home, to get it, to deliver it, every single step. An artificial increase in energy is like a VAT tax on every single level and step of the operation to make the good and deliver it to the store. And when you impose that artificial cost of fuel, it has to be passed through, and it ends up increasing the price of the product. Every single product in America, on every single store, on every single shelf, in every single city in the country. And Joe Biden did this to you. He's destroying the quality of life by taking cheap energy away from the American people. And he's doing it intentionally because cheap energy empowers the people. And expensive energy makes the people dependent upon government for everything. Climate change doesn't cause inflation. Joe Biden does. Bidenomics cause inflation. Stupid energy policy causes inflation. And you can raise the interest rate to 20%. It isn't going to bring prices back down till you get the price of energy back down. That means drill, baby, drill. And the only way that's happening, the only way the quality of life is coming back to America is if Donald Trump is reelected as president. Biden get back in, we're going into a depression, virtually guaranteed. Because that man doesn't understand a thing. He is completely manipulated and controlled by the people who have co-opted his administration. And folks, we don't need a new law to secure the border. We need a new president. And we don't need higher interest rates. We need a new Federal Reserve chairman. And if you want to end the crime, we need a new president. So that's how you fix things, is you get a new president. And if you don't put in a new president, this one's going to destroy everything you built in 200 years. He's going to destroy it all in 8 short years. And Joe Biden, who's not the racist, he's not the racist. They're after P. Diddy, the black man. That's funny. I don't recall them going after Ghislaine Maxwell's client list in her little black book. All those white Democrats that should be in prison for child molestation, perversion, etc., etc. What happened to Ghislaine Maxwell's little black book? How come they aren't going after all the white Democrats in that book instead of going after P. Diddy? Oh, that's right. They use the black people to distract you from what they're really doing, which is destroying your inner city environment, destroying the work opportunities, destroying the shopping possibilities, destroying the schools so that there aren't any educated people and they will be trapped forever. Just like the other generations since the early 1960s, when government stepped in, took over, broke up the family, kicked the fathers out, and paid the women to have more children in a fatherless family. How's that working out for you, folks? Anybody decide maybe the Democrats aren't helping the black population? They're enslaving you again on the plantation system that I referenced before? Could be. Okay, so let's move on here. Last week I was reading my article that's posted on the website right down here. Can you see that? The broken tax system completely exposed. If you want to read the article, you can go over it. Let's go through it. As I recall last week, I started out by pointing out that the federal income tax has been held repeatedly by the Supreme Court in the original controlling decisions and in the decisions before World War II to be an indirect excise. And it was getting to the discussion of subject matter jurisdiction, which is the authority of the court to enforce any claim for a tax brought to the court by the DOJ to enforce what the IRS claims is owed. And let's pick it up right there and we'll reread that section as we move on. In the United States of America, under the Constitution of the United States of America, our federal courts are courts of only limited, specifically enumerated, constitutionally granted powers that only exist as written in the law. The courts cannot enforce ideas or philosophy or custom or habit or ritual or beliefs or their own preferences or even common sense. The only thing the U.S. courts can enforce are the written laws of the authorized statutes of the titles of the United States Code, and they're authorized to enforce them as written. Nothing else. They're not allowed to use judicial legislation to change the law and then enforce their opinion instead of the written law. Courts don't make law. They enforce what's written. And of course, that's gone by the way, hasn't it? All they're doing is rewriting the law today and not letting the jury see it. And of course, under the Constitution of the United States of America, a statute, a law, can only be written by Congress where, first, the Constitution grants a specific power to be exercised by the Congress, as is done in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1, and second, the Constitution specifically grants the authority to the Congress to write law to enforce the power granted, as is done in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18. And that enforcement power has to have specific applicability to the enforcement of the specific power alleged, granted, and exercised in operational practice by the IRS to engineer the claim. So, if the IRS operates one way that's not within the law, the court can't enforce that. They can only enforce it when the IRS operates within the law. So the three required elements of our constitutional law in America necessary to establish a legitimate and lawful subject matter jurisdiction of the court that can be lawfully taken over a specific or particular legal action, sufficient to allow the court to entertain and adjudicate the action in the court, in other words, enforce the claim for tax brought to the court by the DOJ, three things are necessary. One, a specific power to tax must be granted by the Constitution or an amendment for Congress to exercise in law for the IRS to operate. 2, a specific grant of authority for Congress to write law must be made by the Constitution or the amendment with respect to the administration and enforcement of the specific power granted in number 1. Now, we have both of these constitutional elements present in the original body of the Constitution. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1 authorizes Congress to tax by duty, impost, and excise. There's the granted powers. And Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18, the original necessary and proper enabling enforcement clause authorizes Congress to write law to enforce the 3 powers granted: impost, duty, and excise. Direct taxes are also authorized to be enforced under Article 1, but they can only be enforced against the states, not the American people. The only taxes that are authorized to be enforced by authorized law against the American people is the duty, the impost, and the excise granted by Article 1. The third element of subject matter jurisdiction is having been authorized by the Constitution to exercise a power and to enforce it with law, Congress has to write a law. A specific statute must be legislatively enacted by an authorized Congress, and that statute must have specific application to the enforcement of the actual and specific power alleged granted and exercised in operational practice in number 1 and made enforceable with authorized law under number 2 above. So you have to have a power granted, an authority to write law, and then they have to have written the law. These fundamental elements of constitutional law, controlling the ability of a federal court to lawfully take a fully granted, properly granted subject matter jurisdiction over a legal claim for tax made by a complainant, i.e. the United States Department of Justice, in the federal district court, combined with the irrefutable lack of an enabling enforcement clause, which does not exist in the 16th Amendment as written and adopted, make the United States' claims in the courts that the 16th Amendment is the foundational authority for the enforcement of the income tax against the individual American citizens on the mere basis of being a person with alleged gross income appear dubious at best and a complete and total lie and fraud at worst, as this lack of a fully granted constitutional authority to write law under the 16th Amendment also explains the alleged tax protesters' claims in the last 50 years that if the tax is under the 16th Amendment, then it must be voluntary, as no law is constitutionally authorized to be written by Congress by an enabling enforcement clause in the amendment. And therefore, no law that's constitutionally authorized can exist for the court to lawfully enforce and take subject matter jurisdiction under to enforce. It doesn't exist. The 16th Amendment's lack of an enabling enforcement clause is a fatal claim to the federal courts and the DOJ's claim that subject matter jurisdiction exists under the 16th Amendment. And this is what they've been doing to you for 75 years. All of the IRS frivolous position documents blatantly and openly assert that it's frivolous to claim the 16th Amendment didn't create a new power to tax directly and without limitation. And the problem is that even if it is interpreted improperly to have created a new power, it's impossible. It's impossible to show that Congress is authorized to write law to enforce that alleged new power. So even if there is a new power, it can't be enforced in the courts. It's fraud. There's no authority to write law. The court cannot show subject matter jurisdiction is granted. The whole thing's been a fraud. And because of it, what they're actually enforcing is not constitutional taxation by impost, duty, or excise, indirect taxation. They're enforcing an unconstitutional direct tax on labor called for by the second plank of the Communist Manifesto, which specifically reads a heavy, progressive, or graduated income tax. That's what the judges are enforcing. Communism. Communism. We'll be back in 5. Okay, this is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network. This is the Truth Attack Hour, and I'm just going to get right back into it. So, what we have is a situation where the lower federal district and circuit courts have, over time, seditiously reversed the Supreme Court's original and true holding made in 1916 that the income tax is authorized and is constitutional under the granted and enforceable indirect Article 1 taxing authorities, where income is the measure of the amount of the indirect tax that is owed on the income derived from the activity subject to an impost duty or excise tax owed by persons engaging in those taxable activities, subject to some impost on foreign activity, foreign imports, and in foreign places like territories and possessions, or a duty imposed on exported goods. So we have duty-free shops behind the security checkpoint, but only at the international terminal, and the excise, which was ruled in 1911 to be the taxes on the manufacture, consumption, and sale of commodities within the country, things like alcohol, tobacco, firearms, petroleum fuels, taxes on licenses to pursue certain occupations, like selling alcohol, tobacco, or firearms, and taxes on the corporate privilege, where it is the privilege that is the subject of the tax, and income is the yardstick that measures the amount of tax owed on the earnings derived from the taxable activity. There is no authority to tax everything you do. It's not subject to any impost, duty, or excise, and they can't get around the limitation that those are the only enforceable powers by claiming that the 16th Amendment lets them tax all sources of income, and then claim labor as income, i.e. profit, not an equal exchange of value for value, money for time on an hourly basis. There's no profit in that. It's an equal exchange of value for value. If one side were profiting every single hour of the day, you think the other side would maintain the relationship? No, of course not. That's not the way humanity works. Each side recognizes a certain amount of value in the other's contribution. The employer wants someone there every hour, and the employee recognizes that the store's not really selling that much stuff. But they need someone to be here or it'll all get stolen. So you have an equal exchange of value for value. There's no profit. There was never any intended taxation of the labor of the American people. The Supreme Court plainly held in 1916 in the Brushaber versus Union Pacific Railroad Company decision, that's at 240 U.S. 1, 1916, and in the next decision handed down, Stanton v. Baltic Mining, 240 U.S. 103, also 1916. Both cases, they decided that the income tax is an indirect tax under Article 1 and is not a direct tax under the 16th Amendment. Here's what they wrote. The provisions of the 16th Amendment conferred no new power of taxation, but simply prohibited the previous complete and plenary power of income taxation possessed by Congress from the beginning from being taken out of the category of indirect taxation to which it inherently belonged. It prohibits the power from being taken out of the category of indirect taxation. It permanently places it there because there's no authority to write law for a new power. So how could any new power be created? It goes on. It is clear on the face of this text that it does not purport to confer power to levy income taxes in a generic sense, an authority already possessed and never questioned. Under Article 1, Section 8, the court had previously held many times in the late 1800s that taxation of income by excise, income earned by corporations, was legitimate, or to limit and distinguish between one kind of income taxes and another. But the whole purpose of the amendment was to relieve all income taxes when imposed from apportionment from a consideration of the source where the income was derived. They're referring to what the court actually did in 1896 in Pollock v. Farmers Loan and Trust, where the court decided that because of the source taxed, it was a direct tax, and because it wasn't apportioned, it couldn't be sustained. The source of what was taxed was rent on property, and they ruled taxes on property are direct. So because of the source, property, it was a direct tax, and because it wasn't apportioned, it couldn't be sustained. So the 16th Amendment gets rid of that problem for the court. They can never again rule it's direct because of the source. They could, however, argue it's direct because that's what the IRS and the DOJ are arguing they're allowed to do. You don't need a source argument when the government walks into court and says, we're allowed to do this because of the 16th Amendment. Wrong. That's it, you're out. Lack of subject matter jurisdiction. The court can't enforce what you operationally practice. This case is over. You're admitting it's unconstitutionally direct because the word direct isn't in the amendment. The court rejected that argument repeatedly, consistently, right up to World War II, and it hasn't addressed it since. So when you argue it's the 16th Amendment, you cut your own throat in court. The Justice Department cuts its own throat. No judge can establish subject matter jurisdiction under the 16th Amendment. There's no enabling enforcement clause to authorize Congress to write law to enforce this allegedly new power. It's a fraud. The court goes on. The various propositions are so intermingled as to cause it to be difficult to classify them. We are of opinion, however, that the confusion is not inherent, but rather arises from the conclusion that the 16th Amendment provides for a hitherto unknown power of taxation. That is, a power to levy an income tax which, although direct, should not be subject to the regulation of apportionment applicable to all other direct taxes. And the far-reaching effect of this erroneous assumption will be made clear by generalizing the many contentions advanced in argument to support it. Now, this is really important because this clause, where they talk about the propositions are intermingled, the confusion is not inherent, it arises from the conclusion that the 16th Amendment provides for a hitherto unknown power. This is what the government cites as their authority for a direct tax. This phrase, this paragraph, only they leave out the next sentence and the far-reaching effect of this erroneous assumption. The court says that their belief is an erroneous assumption. And when they explain the arguments, it'll be clearly understood. Will be made clear by generalizing the many contentions advanced in argument to support it. They're specifically declaring the government's argument to be an erroneous assumption, and this is what the courts accept from the federal government is establishing the 16th Amendment allows is the court's declaration that that's wrong. They enter the description of the question and leave out the answer and claim the question posed is the granted authority. This is the clause they use. It's an erroneous. The court declares it's erroneous. This is how blatant the fraud is. So the court goes on. It clearly results that the direct tax proposition, or it clearly results that the proposition, i.e. one of direct taxation, and the contentions under it, if acceded to, would cause one provision of the Constitution to destroy another. That is, they would result in bringing the provisions of the amendment, exempting a direct tax from apportionment, into irreconcilable conflict with the general requirement that all direct taxes be apportioned. This result would create radical and destructive changes in our constitutional system and multiply confusion. Boy, did they see that one coming, huh? Boy, did they see that one coming, because that's what's been done. Radical and destructive changes without proper authority under the Constitution to write new law for such radical and destructive changes. The court goes on. Oh, what I'm reading to you, these are the words of the Supreme Court. This isn't me making stuff up. This is the actual text of the Supreme Court's decision. You can go find it. It's in Brushaber v. Union Pacific. This is all laid out. It's a difficult decision to understand because of the way it's written, which, like I said, the previous paragraph is they take the question posed as the power granted and ignore the fact that the next sentence says the question posed is erroneous. It's all wrong. I mean, this is how obvious the fraud is. Okay, so the court goes on. The 16th Amendment, although referred to in argument, has no real bearing and may be put out of view. As pointed out in recent decisions, this does not extend the taxing power to new or accepted subjects, but merely removes all occasion, which otherwise might exist, for an apportionment among the states of taxes laid on income, whether it be derived from one source or another, the implication being derived from a taxable source, not just earned by any person from any activity, including the exercise of the right to work, or to be a direct tax on the labor of every human being. That's not authorized. So this is language from Brushaber, again invoked in Stanton v. Baltic Mining, the case handed down just previous to the Stanton case. These two cases were taken consecutively by the court to answer the questions posed about the federal income tax and its collection from individuals and its imposition on corporate operations. The two questions were handled consecutively in different cases. And they are the controlling decisions. The Supreme Court has consistently referred to and invoked these as proof that the tax is constitutional. And then the lower courts ignore the fact that it's constitutional because it's under Article 1, not the 16th Amendment. And then they enforce the 16th Amendment as though it were the second plank of the Communist Manifesto, which calls for graduated taxation, which uses tax brackets to divide the population, set them at warfare with one another in a system of class warfare, not unified representation. And the class warfare results from the fact that each class is treated differently under the law. And specifically, the classes to be engaged in the class warfare system are defined by the tax brackets of the income tax system, where different laws, i.e. rates of tax, are imposed on the different classes, urging each class to constantly call on Congress to tax the other class with more tax, but not themselves. And the politicians, as a result of this division of the population, can never represent the whole of the American people. They are compelled to pick one class or the other, and representative system of government is destroyed as it becomes class warfare to rule. And the people are kept fighting with one another to the extent that they never notice. It's the political class that's looting the treasury and destroying the quality of life by running out the currency to enrich themselves, their own family members, their corporate and business partners, and to advance the causes they believe in, and to put in prison the people who oppose them politically or philosophically. This is the socialist government that has co-opted Joe Biden's administration. I think we're coming up on the end of the show, so we'll pick this up again next week when we're going to talk about what the Supreme Court has said about your right to work without taxation. This is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network. This is the Truth Attack Hour. We'll be back next week with more. And get yourself over to taxfreedom.com. Get educated. Get yourself over to irszoom.com and get help with some of the IRS letters, which are starting to come again, because after 2 years of COVID vacation, the IRS is back sending out collection letters, and everybody should be answering them. Because when they send out 2 million letters, if we send back 2 million responses, they won't be able to function anymore, and Congress will see the need to pass a new law, a new system that restores constitutional taxation and gives us back America. Yeah, thank you. Always fun.
Bye-bye.
Oh, yes, right. Stop recording.